Hello, everybody out there watching us. We are exploring language and imagery today, and we are all here. Hey, you guys.
Here's imagery. Peace. Hello.
So, guys,
Well, I am so glad that we're here today. I got great poems sent to me. How about you guys this week?
yeah, it was pretty
There
good.
was some amazing stuff being sent.
Yes, and the people are exploring different forms. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have one question sent from KB Nelson that we're going to discuss a little bit later into it, but we do have some stuff to talk about with the imagery and I already forgot what we're talking about, imagery and meaning, vivid imagery, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, that was poetry. So that was my rendition of like last minute poetry. Let's get started because I am really tired. I think we're all probably a little bit tired right now. So our first discussion question is, how does the use of vivid imagery control to the overall impact and meaning of a poem? Like using how important it is to have very vivid imagery in poetry, do you think, guys?
I think it's extremely important because a poem is a very shortened, in many ways, shortened version of language. And you get more impact if you have an image, if you can pull people into something that's visceral, something that brings on imagery of scent, of sound, of mood, atmosphere. Very important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I really feel like you said, like scent, sound, and taste, like just sensory descriptions. I think it's really important in poetry to hit all the five senses. And a lot of times, it's like most of the time we probably just live in like the visual, or we kind of leave out taste a lot of times, or leave out smell. But I think all those descriptions, I think it's critical. It really transports you to another world, and it brings up memory. I feel like imagery is really good at engaging the reader with the material on that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think excuse me, I think showing not telling is just as important in poetry as it is in in prose.
Hmm.
When you're um when excuse me, doing everything you can to um show the reader what if you're going to say if you're going to say, and I'm using an example, paraphrasing an example from someone in the class, because I got a few prose poems, which made me really happy. If you're going to say there was um, a spot ripped open, or a spot was open, you know, showing it by saying it was torn or ripped or something like that, something more visceral. So showing, not telling.
Yeah, I was going to just say that I know we've got some fiction writers that are registered for this, and yeah, it's like, and you guys know, if you're writing fiction, it really makes a difference whether you're showing something to telling something, just as important in poetry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then that kind of goes into the next question of our word choices, specifically enhancing or transforming the reader's experience. And like, for an example, one of the things I really, really love doing is when you take something that's unexpected, you put like the sense that is not expected, like tasting a baby. That's typically not the way that we describe a baby. But it just adds, to me, this whole other realm to it. And maybe tasting a baby is going a little extreme, but like smelling the sky, you don't normally smell the sky. I have not tasted any babies, by the way, for the record.
Oh, come on, you're a mother. I'm sure you did at one point.
Yeah, just want to put that out there. But so how about that? Like using the what we would technically say wrong sensories and pairing them together.
So like synesthesia, you like basically like tasting green, hearing blue, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Touching purple, all those things like that. Yeah, I think that's great. I think anytime you take contrasting senses and visuals and put them together, it just creates a powerful like memory for the reader, or it creates curiosity and engagement, interest, which is what we want to maintain interest throughout with the reader. So that's what I think.
This, yeah, the sky screams stars. Now that's
Yeah,
a whole lot of S's, but alliteration. But again, it's like it makes you pay attention and you build a mood that way too. If you have something like you're doing something very dark, having or violent even, you can have that kind of imagery in there. The number 6 smells like burning
I love
nipples.
that. Maybe.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's like those kinds of images are great if you're writing weird and cosmic, weird and cosmic horror, like licking the stars or something like that. Like, what does a star taste like? Obviously, that's impossible to taste the star, but still, just kind of, you know, imagery like that.
For now, Max.
Yeah.
For now, it's impossible. For now.
I recently heard of an article where one of the astronauts that walked on the moon, I guess they had picked up a rock, and in the spaceship or something, he smelled the rock on the way back. And so everybody was like, well, what did it smell like? And he said, like fireworks. And I keep playing off of that imagery of the moon smells like fireworks. I mean, to me, that's just awesome.
Yeah, that is.
I was hoping we were going to get the rock felt like marshmallows.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because I think we talked about that at one point, didn't we? And something that we've done at some point.
Did he taste the rocks though? The space rocks?
I would have.
Probably there's some protocol about not tasting things you pick up in space.
Yeah. Well, I will stop. I was going to have true confessions of things I've tasted, but we won't go there right now. So, how about the role of figurative language, like metaphors, similes? What do you think the role of things like that play in creating complex emotions and ideas in poetry?
Shouldn't smell like cheese. No, it shouldn't smell like cheese. I hope it doesn't smell like cheese.
That was him not washing his uniform.
I think I think in terms of like going back to like writing like something more primal or more cosmic, it really helps to make it relatable. When you're trying to, I don't know, like I'm trying to think of something that I wrote and I can't think of anything that I wrote. Just like like I write a lot about cities, like cities, like dreamscapes, like trying, using them as metaphors for unknowable places, like for in cosmic horror, for example, something that's like beyond us. So I think it's important. I guess my point is it's important in terms of, I guess, relatability, depending on the genre of poetry that you're writing. If you're writing in more of like something that weird fiction, cosmic horror, if you're writing in that sort of like that grand infinite kind of space, like metaphor and like that kind of figurative complexity can help not make it feel as impossible.
Yeah. I feel like I'm stalling. Can you hear me right now? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I just feel like for me, I really like metaphors, like where you kind of combine the ordinary with the extraordinary, kind of. So if you take something kind of mundane and then you connect something extraordinary to it, I mean, the most simplest would be like oh, she's like a tornado, destroys everything in her path. That's a really bad one. I think if you just do that though with like practical things, like it just enhances everything, combining like mundane things with extraordinary things in metaphor. Using extraordinary metaphors to describe simple stuff, like everyday ordinary stuff. Similes I don't really like too much, like a simile is like a metaphor or something like that. A simile, which is a simile, I just don't like them because I don't like the word like to go into a description. I feel like it kind of pulls you out, but I know there's techniques and ways to use it that can be helpful, but I'm more of a metaphor person. I think metaphors are stronger personally than similes, and I think it's really good to use them when combined the ordinary with the extraordinary.
Yeah, I think and everyone excuse me, I have a little bit of a frog. Maybe I was tasting frogs earlier in my throat. Anyways, I think also I use metaphor more than simile. Metaphor with similes, I think you can use more if you're writing fiction, but in a poem, and Max, you might have a different experience because you're writing longer pieces with the prose poems. But I think that once you start getting words like and as if, that it can kind of slow down the poem. So I mean, Jamal, your example, where she was like a tornado, you could say she spun debris in her path. And it gives the intonation of a tornado. Maybe it's a tornado goddess or elemental. And so you can get across that point without having to put in the if she was like.
I think like for me, and I apologize to to my students. I haven't gotten all my comments yet, and I will reply with all my comments on the poems. But like for example, like with prose poems, I view similes and metaphors almost as like building blocks. There we go, right there. I see what you did. Because you can have like you can write a prose poem and you can have a run-on sentence and it's okay, and you can use like one or two similes to or metaphors to kind of build like a well, depending on the editor, but you can have a longer sentence, and you can kind of use a metaphor or simile to kind of connect that sentence. Kind of like that paragraph I read from Memnons of the Night, like that first bit was just all one sentence. And you can kind of use similes in that way, similes and metaphors in that way to kind of connect that. I guess kind of to Colleen's point, like even in prose poetry, I wouldn't try to say like, I wouldn't use like all the time, saying like, she is like a tornado that is spinning in the night like a blob. I wouldn't like jump into a simile, then jump into another simile, because then you kind of lose the imagery a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think in like if you're doing short forms, and I know several people have submitted haiku, sci-fi Q. It's really hard to do that because you have so few words to work with. And I'm just going to read one I just got. Dreams and Nightmares, that David Kapascal Merkel puts out. And here's a little coup. I slit open the envelope. The ghost tumbles out. Dead letter. I love that. And that's just like, there the image there is, you see that ghost tumbling out of the envelope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We actually have a couple questions that popped up. I'm going to put one up on screen. Amy Dree says, what about the senses we don't have? The glow of ultraviolet or hearing ultrasound, or how a tentacle feels picking up a rock and tasting it. I like that. What do you guys, what would your answer be to Amy? I'm going to say yes. Like the more we can think of the different things like that, I think, that's what poetry is, and writing and creativity, right? Is to find the ideas that haven't been overthought. We're not going to think of probably brand new ideas that nobody has ever thought, but the ones that haven't been thought over and over again, repeatedly. I'll put that question back up so we can discuss it.
Yeah, again, this is the same thing. Like we're stretching, we're trying to find new ways and new senses to explain something, to explain a feeling through a sense, or to explain a sense through a feeling. I don't know if we were talking offline or if I mentioned this last week, like Laurie Anderson with William Burroughs saying the sun's coming up like a big bald head. There's a simile right there. The sun's coming up like a big bald head. But in that case, it works. And, and I think, again, it depends on the voice you have in a poem. If you want to, because you could use simile very effectively, but you have to use it with intent. And I think also, like, mixing it up like that, having, as I believe Amy Dries likes to go by Dries. So Dries, I think that's a great way of doing it, because you're going to grab the reader's attention, because they're going to go, oh, I've never looked at it that way before.
Yeah, and Amy actually adds to that. That was directed to M. Gold's cosmic horror topic specifically.
Yeah, I was trying to look at like Oblivion and Flux, because that's something that I like. I can't find a specific example, but so I guess to try and answer that question, I try to think of something like Abnagon. So Abnagon, I've referenced this before. So I try to think what would this entity 14 billion years at the edge of existence, this yellow neutron star, think, or would it think? And if it didn't think, how would we perceive something like that thinks, and what would our reaction to something like that be? And then and then I just go from there, because so I'm not a scientist, but basically the light, so by the time the light of a star 14 billion years is the farthest that we had the Hubble, or that we know, the end of the galaxy, or that the oldest light. So by the time that reaches us, it would theoretically be dead. So anyway, I think about that, and then I think about, I guess, what would our reaction be, as a society, consciously, something like that, and then I try to think, well, how would I react to something? How would I personally react to something like that? And then, from a reacting to something that's cataclysmic like that. What kind of I know that doesn't really answer the question, but I have to start here, and then eventually I'll get there to maybe understand what that tentacle would think the rock would taste, or what the light from that thing might feel when it hits my face, or something.
I think kind of to add to what Max is saying, is kind of humanizing the impossible, in a sense. I think you have to start with what you are. We're all people. So if I connect my hand to the tentacle, I know how my hand works, and I can imagine it kind of being like a tentacle. I can write from that perspective, that honest perspective of a real experience that I had, even though I'm writing about an experience that's impossible for me to have. So I think using our own humanity as the baseline, humanizing the impossible, I think that's the way to start out.
And that's also that's basically the definition of weird fiction. Is, for weird fiction, there's a baseline normal. There whatever that normal is, whatever the reality is, whether it's this reality, or when Algernon Blackwood was writing, a Clark Ashton Smith, whatever. There has to be a baseline normal, and then something is weird, something is off about that baseline normal. Like light is curving. Why is the light curving? Or the light smells purple. Well, why does the light smell purple? What does purple smell like, or something? There is some. A great example is if you haven't read it, it's I'm going to butcher the author's last name. That Guy de Maupassant's one of his stories. I don't remember the name of the story, but basically it's about this man who notices every night a piece of his furniture is missing. And then he finds out that basically this other man has cursed his furniture, and the furniture just walks away. And then he goes to find the man, and all his furniture is there. The guy steals his furniture, and the furniture walks away to this man, this little village out in this little French village outside where he lives. But it's an example of like a classic weird tale that everything's normal, and then all of a sudden it's not. That's where it starts. The starts going out at the beginning. Yeah. 9 million years ago.
And I think like whether it's weird fiction or Gothic poetry or science fiction, body horror poetry, you're going for my voice. You're going for that strong imagery. Someone at work said the other day about a child having a cold, one of their children, that caterpillars were crawling from their nose. It was like, what? And it was
I love that.
Yeah, little snot caterpillars. And we can absolutely visually see what that is the moment you say something like that. You could put in a bit of color if you want. You could put in a tactile aspect.
You have the yellow fuzzy slug behind you as the.
That's right, my fuzzy non-slug slug. Yes.
Here's
glittering.
Another question from Diane West. I actually love this. Metaphors and similes. Do you just sit down and brainstorm a pool of these to draw from? Like, do we think of them ahead of time? Or when I read a lot of times it seems to me that the author has really thought them through. For me, my personal experience, I don't think of them ahead of time. But when I have something like, say, let's go with the woman as a tornado kind of thing. I have a violent woman character, tearing through a house or something. And so that's when I'll take, like, probably I've written a violent woman character tears through my house or tears through the house. But that's when I'll go back, and instead of trying to think of it ahead of time, then I'll think, what else could she be? She could be a hurricane, she could be a dust storm, a dust devil, depending on what the poem or story calls for. And so I really do think of them at that moment. And it is like, I've written this blah paragraph because they're all blah in the beginning. We don't put genius down on paper, I think, a lot of times. And then it's the reworking and the editing that brings that out. So that's kind of how I do it. I always think of it like, here's the bleh. I got the idea out. And then I go back and try to put in like the magic or the thought of, what's different. How about you guys?
I just spit it out. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, all right, except for Max, who does put genius on the page from the first try.
I get so. Yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, I do have like kind of it's been a little bit of like a haphazardly now it's not haphazard anymore, but like a mythos of cyber gods that kind of helps plan things out. But in terms of the structure, like with the metaphors and similes, I think that that just kind of comes when I handwrite it, and then it just then it changes after I after I type it, I guess.
Yeah, I would say I don't normally. I mean, once in a while there might be a metaphor, something I see, a simile that might inspire a poem or a story. I once wrote a story based off of having a surgical procedure, and my stomach was really hurting and inflamed. And I said it was like having a black hole in my stomach. And from that, I wrote a whole story. So they can inspire that. But, I think if I actually think of any great ones, I do keep kind of like a little file on my computer of various metaphors and similes. And every once in a while, I look at it and then I forget about it. But just in case there's something that can be used or turned into a haiku, because short poems, you might be able to pull that out, take out the likes, and away you go.
For me, I kind of metaphor will kind of spring out of a feeling that I'm trying to capture when I'm laying down, like either with passion, pain, or something. I'll take those things and just out of just living with that pain, whatever hurts me or whatever truth I'm trying to convey, it's almost like it lends itself to metaphor, and metaphors will just kind of like grow out of that as I'm writing. So it's like the metaphor is always like the fruit on the vine for me. It's never really what I start out with.
Yeah, all very good answers. We have a ton of stuff in the chat, so I'm going to try to share some of these pretty quickly so we can go over them. This is a question aimed at Jamal. Is that the metaphor simile difference you mean? But I think it's to do with this comment above it, which I love this. Amy, you have to tell me where you got this from because I really love this.
Oh, this is really
Mice
cool.
pop in tightening fists like overripe plums, leaking juice and slack. I mean,
that is awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not that we would do that to mice ever, but you know.
Yeah, I like the combination of both. It's really nice with like metaphor and simile in there. It's nice. It's great.
Yeah. So I think that's the line that Amy is referring to for this question.
Mm-hmm. Well, is that the metaphor simile difference you mean, Jamal Hodge, or is it more complex? Well, I don't kind of fully grasp the question that she's asking me with that line, but I think you mean like mice pop in tightening fists, like overripe plums, leaking juice and slack. I mean, I think this as a reading altogether works great, and how it uses like metaphor and simile together. But I don't know that you're trying to separate them or if they're like different stanzas the way it's coming in right now. But I would say yeah, I would say yeah, I like how you combined it too. It's beautiful. Like how you're using
Oh, you
so
know
many.
what you could do with this line? Oh, sorry, I got super
No,
excited for a second.
go ahead. Go
I seem to be having a lot of issues too with like the screen freezing up and everything. I don't know if you guys are or not.
Yeah, I am too.
Mostly Max is freezing for me, but
yeah, me too.
Okay. I'm going to say if you didn't want to use simile in this line, you could say overripe mice pop in tightening fists, leaking plum juice and slack. You know, and then you kind of get rid of the simile, but you're making it more immediate. If you didn't want to use simile, I mean, I'm not.
You don't need like at all.
That's what I mean. It's overripe mice gives you the idea that they're like plums. You know, leaking plum juice.
So. It's almost like when you put like in there, you kind of stay in the thought, but when you remove it, it becomes like experiential, like you feel it emotionally more.
Yeah, I guess the other thing is like with simile, if you're and this isn't something specific to prose poetry, but like, you know, depends on how subtle you want to be. You know, I don't like to always use like literal image, like I wouldn't write this as like they're literally being squeezed. But it's, you know, similes and metaphors work best when you're trying. I think when you're trying to be maybe a little more subtle, or you don't want to be as you know, mice popping, I guess.
Yeah, if you remove like and slack, I think it impacts even more vividly. Mice pop.
And you could change it around so that the reveal is more at the end. So it could be tightening fists on overripe plums, leaking juice, mice pop.
Yeah, hand opens to slack mice, you know, because then you know, oh, you've been squeezing mice this whole time.
It's more of a reveal. that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a question to get off the mice topic before we get in trouble. But Amy, I would love to know where that line is. Like if that's your line or if you pulled that from another poem, because I really do like that. So this is a question for Max. Do you keep a world book or some other kind of reference files for your universe?
I have notes in I blame Linda for this. I have like several dozens of notebooks, and I have just notes on the various cyber gods, and like I have charts of their pantheons, and you know how I structured them, and so I guess sort of kind of a reference file for them. I don't always go and reference it because I'm always writing new stuff about them and making new reference files for them. So I would say if world building is something you enjoy doing, it always helps to have a guide, but you do see that in poetry, especially epic poetry. You do see world building, like with Oblivion. I sort of tried to do that in some of the poems. Some of them reference each other. There were references to the cyber gods in a lot of the poems. My next collection is a little more deliberate in terms of like the references, but it's not something that is obviously like you don't have to do that in your poems.
Exactly. I have a comment from Amy for Jamal. I like the metaphor of metaphors being fruit. So, and I'm just going to say, Amy wrote that on the fly to explore. I really want to see that in a poem now, Amy.
Yeah, you got build.
I really love that.
Or keep it as horror coup, just maybe play with it a bit more. I know Scotty said, and I hope I pronounced your name right, that she likes the assonance in like and leak, though like is kind of a wasted word. Yeah. So I think you could take that assonance but play it around in something more powerful.
Lick and leak. I lick the mice that are squeezed like plums. Oh wait, I used like again. Juicing mice. licking the juiced mice. Anyways, all right, that's when we got banned.
You just lick your fingers after you've squeezed the mice. Mice popping, tightening fists.
I like mice, so I actually have like guilt now. mouse death guilt. All right, so how about the use of sensory language, such as, which I feel like we've kind of covered this, sensory language such as sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, and creating a more immersive and engaging poetic experience. Kind of going to the mouse comment that we have been tossing around a lot. I think for me, that's one thing that makes it more horrible is thinking of mice as plums. A plum is delicious, technically, if you eat fruit. I've heard this, but, a mouse is not delicious, typically we think.
How would you know?
Yeah, she'd actually rather eat a mouse than probably a plum.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, how is the mouse prepared?
Squeezed.
Do you guys have any thought to put it on that? Like maybe an example from your own poetry, how you used. Okay. I mean, for me, I think of the moon as a ghostly galleon affected me so much. And this is very true. Unless you are a cat, then mice are probably quite delicious.
Everything you kill is delicious if you're a cat.
Yeah.
Mass murderers.
Too funny. But okay, so going back to the question, like for instance, like the moon is a ghostly galleon. Obviously, that's a sight, a very visual sight of a windy day. You could have the same thing, hearing the howling. That's kind of pretty stereotypical, but you can taste the salt on the wind. You could touch the wind by feeling it cold on your skin. Smelling the wind again is kind of like the aroma of bougainvillea in the night or something like that. How about you guys? Like, do you have any input on that?
I've got a short poem that I'll try reading in my little croaky frog voice. It's not about frogs.
I'm glad
so
you're cracking Chris up.
this one is
No, go ahead.
this one is was published in the Water Anthology, and this is one where enjambment was very important, but also it's very visual. It's called Siren Song. We are salty summer slumbers and sand in your shorts, illicit lusts upon the beach, and we are scampi, tuna steaks, and calamari, fugu, fish fingers, and shark fin soup, and we are mysteries netted and dreams devoured, human half a delicacy, prize a piquant extra, and we were. So in that case, the enjambment, but also it's like it's getting that sense of beach and ocean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how about you? Anybody else?
I'm just trying to look for something from it. Give me one
Okay.
second, bringing it up.
So, sorry, I was having some camera issues. I apologize. So we were talking about sensory descriptions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, using all the different senses to create an immersive and engaging poetic experience.
So yeah, I mean, I like I like using so particularly in I guess in cosmic poetry, I love using I have a weird obsession with using like train like rust and like phlegm, because like rust is such a like everyone like knows what like it's such a potent smell, like rust and blood and 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 like those kind of you know those kind of noises and smells and so I mean so I'll just read like a quick little bit from this. So this is from Crimson Faces, which was actually published in Space and Time magazine, and was also nominated for a Riesling and maybe it was a push card. I don't remember. But I smelled the foul odors coming off petrified wood in the form of some grotesque fungi mixing with the rusty hinges. My senses militarized themselves in an attempt to counter the offending stenches, but their campaign was thwarted, for the odors were too strong, and my eyes were still muddled with the pustule horizon of iron and blood, only to be reckoned by guttural noises coming from the outside of the speeding train. So
That's pretty good.
Oh, right. Sorry, just Siren's Call. Yes, there's been all these backhand chats going on here. The poem was called Siren Song. So my, ignore my punctuation there. So, all right, we've got a bunch of people in chat right now. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, symbolism, particularly my favorite, of course, is like magic and stuff, because you can use, say, the meaning of a tarot card, which I know Colleen has recently done in the book that she just came out with. How important is symbolism to you guys in poetry? I mean, it feels like one of those loaded questions of like, gee, how pretty am I? You know, of course, symbolism is like a hugely important part of poetry. So what are your thoughts on that?
I personally, I'm obsessed with symbolism. I think that's all I kind of write. It's kind of more like symbolism and trying to create meaning from like just a combination of maybe like 2 or 3 words that symbolize an overall lived experience. You know, I think symbols are like extremely powerful when they're connected to like personal vulnerability and truth. Like when you don't, and just honest symbols, like it's more like instead of trying to design the symbol, like uncover it within yourself. Sort of like, I have like a poem I can share if you will, with a bunch of symbolism, if that works for you guys. Since I haven't read yet, so I want to read something. This one I think I read at Stoke. So this one is called. Let me find a good one for you guys. I will read my. Sorry, I lost it. You continue. I'll come. I'll find it. I'm just trying to find the right one. Sorry.
Okay. Oh man, I actually said I'm not going to say this phrase anymore, but you know what we should do?
Oh, stop now. Stop.
I keep getting myself in trouble with that phrase, but we should have an open mic at some point with all the students to everybody read poetry, like towards the end of this more.
Okay.
I said it.
I have
regret it.
This one.
Okay.
It's called The Fiddler, and you could kind of quickly discern what it's actually about, but it uses a lot of symbolism and movement and language repetition and language. So it's called The Fiddler. Life in squirming pieces between bloody keyboard teeth. The fiddler plays eternal war as the masses move their feet. Delirious within flat circles upon the left-hand path. Rickshaw grins in somber light, the redemption's dying half. For dwindling all the virtues, the fiddler's endless tune, dancing, dancing, dancing beneath a shadow moon. Each hem of twirling skirt, each scream of stomping boot, each dancer's scream of pain, a pride of deepest shame. Saviors sing solo songs entombed in books of stone. The fiddler's tune reverberates through passion, blood, and bone. Double time, swifter, each generation's passing strife, degeneracy, common currency, and a predacious, fleeting life. The rightness of it, pain, hate, wise. Lust, greed, lies. Each sacrifice gives a sacrifice, dancing to his tune. The fiddler plays his screaming fiddle beneath a shadowed moon. He pleasures, let him moan. He sorrows, let him weep. He hates, let him love. He loves, let him die. Dance in the revelry of resurrection upon the circle of waves of time. Repeat your hells in shrinking thrill and never have your fill. Falling, falling, falling with the fiddler falling the long way down. Dancing, dancing, dancing in endless burning tune. The fiddler plays his fiddle beneath a shadowed moon. So that's it.
Excellent. Excellent.
So on that comment about symbolism, I too love symbolism. I've always loved my voice. I've always loved even like fairy tales for the symbolism that's in there. I've written mythic poems because I can use the symbolism. So it's something that, and in fact, metaphor is symbolism as well. So I've written poems that are metaphors or stories that are metaphors, and there's symbolism in there. I got to stop talking.
I'm mixed. I mean, I think this is a complex question because, I mean, I think poetry is inherently symbolic.
Yeah.
As the poet, I think regardless of whether it's intent, I think we're inherently, writing something that is is a symbol for something else. Like sometimes there's a poem I wrote called City of Skulls. That really wasn't a symbol. I guess maybe it was a symbol for something. I was just not in a very good place, and I wrote this poem about this city inside my skull that was falling apart. And so I've since, like cities, like I said, I write a lot about cities because cities are something that I think you can relate to. You can walk in a city, you can eat in a city, live in a city, die in a city. It's something in your head that can just be whatever you want it to be. So anyway, but that wasn't necessarily a symbol that I intended. I guess intent is the question. But because I guess for me, it's just, sometimes the poetry I write is just bleak because I enjoy it being bleak. But I have written poems that are symbolic of other things. Like there was a poem I wrote called The 20th Day. for, obviously the 20th day of, like November 20th. So in 2016. So, I mean, but there are others that aren't as on the nose in terms of like what they're supposed to be symbolic for. Most of them, I think, are just, I don't know. I like I said, I don't necessarily try to do, write them with an intent to be symbolic for something or with symbolism. But I think people can find meaning in them. I think the reader will find meaning regardless of whether you intend to, regardless of your intent to, of it. I think the reader will find symbolism in your poetry.
Yeah.
There will be something they resonate with.
Mm-hmm.
My poem that's up for an Aurora Award this year, which is called After the Apocalypse. It's about there being more ghosts than people in the world. It was actually my symbolism for the loneliness I felt during COVID. So in that, people may not know that. They're still going to get a story there. It was my own symbolism. So sometimes the symbolism might be hidden, but if you're doing a university course on symbolism, you might dissect some poems and come up with your own symbolism.
I think that's the beautiful thing about poetry and why it is so enduring as an art form, is that it is definitely a participatory type of art. What you read has symbolism to you, and the symbolism means something to you. Where I would read your poem, Colleen, as a introvert and probably think, oh, the peace and the beauty of this poem. Everybody's a ghost. I mean, that's beautiful. Where you're reading it completely differently as more of a, this is a lonely and a stark thing. I do have a question from Amy about the poem that you read, Jamal, the consonants, and that makes music and rhythm both. What was the stanza structure on that? And I think what she's asking is like A, B, A, B. I think we'd probably have to map that out to actually tell. I couldn't tell from just listening.
I never mapped it, so I really don't know off my head.
Yeah. And then Tom says he likes the rhyme structure there. Chris says he's relieved to hear Mac say his symbolism isn't necessarily intentional. Yeah, and I think that's kind of like getting into the subconscious act of creating something. A lot of times, I mean, for me personally, I don't know what I feel until I put it on paper. And then I read it back to myself and I'm like, oh, I'm really angry about this thing,
Sometimes we don't know we're writing in symbolism. Like it's there and we don't even know it's in our subconscious. Dries, with your comment about mythos and people not being familiar, this is one way we make them familiar. You have to actually put in enough context. Like you can't just say, Persephone sat around drinking. Well, you can. I mean, you actually can, because I've written some poems like that, drinking pomegranate juice, because somebody who knows the myth deeper will pick that up. Somebody who doesn't know the myth will read a different layer, and hopefully there's still a story there. So that's when you're writing, I guess, being aware of the fact that who are you writing for? If you're writing about a myth, if it's a less familiar, because there's tons of myths and there's less familiar ones, there's less familiar Norse gods, Celtic gods, all sorts. So then you're still telling a story in some level, whether it's the deeper mythos of what the gods embody and symbolize, or if it's just, a story about somebody who's a goddess in this world, just like if we're writing our own fantasy story.
Like I have a chapbook coming out this year called Another Mythology, like AN other. Like, you see what I did there? I'm just kidding. And one of the poems is called The Fall of Sin, CIN. And I left it purposely vague, but sin is supposed to kind of be this a little bit, this amalgamation of like Hyacinth and Apollo, and like represent a little bit of that homoeroticism in Greek myths a little bit. But it's a mix of all different myths, kind of like, kind of going back to what Chris said, that, it wasn't intentional. So the first prose poem I wrote was titled Adnagon. Now that wasn't really. So that was written in 2016 out of like my anger and sorrow and depression after the outcome of that election. Anagon, I guess, represented that, this unstoppable, terrifying thing at the edge of existence. So there, I suppose there was a little bit of symbolism for that, but everything else, so like the cyber gods that followed, kind of just happened. So it's still not necessarily intentional, but like our experiences around us help shape the symbols and the poems that we that we write.
Yeah, and I think to answer this question about if nobody knows the mythos, does the symbolism still work? I think yes, because it evolves. So say I can't think of her name now that I brought her up, the snake-haired Medusa. So yeah, Medusa. I'm not tired at all tonight. So Medusa has represented a lot of things throughout time, but like, so maybe now I can really see her as more of a feminist. And I believe you treat her like this in one of your books. Oh, in the book that I just published by you, right? The Lore of Inscrutable Dreams has, but you actually published that poem somewhere else too. So anyways, going back to the point of what I was saying. So I see her as a feminist symbol now to some extent, but I also see her as like a rebel because, as women, a lot of times we're supposed to, and men, not to exclude half of our panel here of people, but we're supposed to look a certain way. We're supposed to have a certain, this is what beauty is. This is what beauty is not. And so in a way, I kind of see the Medusa as a representation or a symbol of throwing that back. She can't even see herself in the mirror. She just is what she is. Mm-hmm. And when she takes off, when you face her, you're stunned. Like, so when the people face her, they're frozen in shock. She's fine with who she is. It's the viewer that isn't. And so whose problem is it? So that's just kind of an off the cuff evolving of, say, something, that is a symbol that is, I feel like, changed a lot. Enduring symbol, though. I don't feel like because nobody knows what Medusa is, we should stop. I think we should write compelling work so that people go, who is this Medusa person? Yeah. And I will say, as far as that non-enduring thing, I just recently ran into somebody who did not know who Merlin was. They knew Harry Potter. They knew, all of the.
Obviously, this is a kid. This has to be a kid.
A young adult, yeah, a young adult. But still, you think Merlin is pretty like foundational, but it's so foundational, it has been forgotten maybe to his generation. So that's why we have to keep bringing him back, I think. We don't want to forget who Merlin was, or Medusa, or Persephone, or,
Or Bram Stoker, since your son didn't know who wrote Dracula, but he did know Dracula.
Yeah.
Or Mary Shelley.
And it also has to do with, the worldview. I mean, like, as a gay Jewish man, like, a lot of mythology most mythologies, Western mythologies come from a very heteronormative, kind of worldview. So like in this chapbook, I wanted to turn some of that on its head. Like one of the poems I wrote was called Endymion and the Twink. Endymion the Twink and the Vengeful Moon. So as long as we're like reinventing these stories and retelling these stories, it'll they'll keep they'll keep being they'll keep being shared.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many versions of like Little Red Riding Hood that have been modernized. Angela Carter, who we mentioned, I think one of the other weeks, that these stories get retold from different perspectives and different views, and that's why we can draw on this if we want to.
The book is called it'll be released in November. It's called Another I'll Angela put it in the chat. It's called Another Mythology.
Can't even spell mythology. Mythology. It's like an other, right? Is it parentheses around other? I'm trying to remember.
It's just lowercase a n and then other.
Okay. Okay, I think that's right. Is that right? And then I'll share it on screen.
Oh no, it's all another is all one word, so it's an then capital O. Because I was trying to be, funny.
Clever.
As Angela tries to spell mythology again, I don't know what is up with me tonight. Myth. Oh, okay. Ology. Okay. There we go. So yes, and I have seen the cover on this. This is an awesome cover. I mean,
yeah, like another poem in there is called, not to plug the chapbook, but another one's called Drag Queen of the Underworld. It's basically about a drag queen that takes over the underworld. No pre-orders yet, but I will let everyone know once it pre-orders.
You sell them books, Max. You sell them books, man.
No, it's I mean it's relevant, I suppose, with what we're talking about. It's we need to make mythology still relevant. I mean it's especially in terms of the queer community. I mean, you have a lot of these myths with these like very hyper masculine, like toxic men that's like, oh yeah, I have to prove my masculinity so I can cut your head off. And it's like, we have, we can talk about the Norse gods. We can talk about, there's beautiful poetry, really beautiful, especially in the Prose Edda. Like there's beautiful poetry that we can talk about, but I think we need to talk about it in a way that doesn't, kick everyone else out of the conversation.
Yeah. And also by talking about it, it brings up things that we're having trouble with now, things that need to be addressed now, like victim shaming. How many beautiful women were victim shamed and punished because some god decided they wanted to rape them? But it's
Medusa.
not. Yeah, it's not the god's fault. I mean, she was too beautiful. That's totally her fault. She dressed wrong. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had too many drinks, And so I think that's another reason why we can't really take these myths and not talk about them just because they maybe are not popularly remembered, because there's always, for me, and maybe we can close on this. For me, one of the reasons to write poetry is to change mindsets. It's to bring things up in a very small packaged way that doesn't need to be, say, an essay. It's something that somebody can read in a moment, but it has hooks like Velcro. And so it's going to stay lodged in the mind, whether somebody likes it or not, and keep working on their thoughts and cause them to see new things in a new way. They may not agree with it. It may make them angry, but I think that's the point of poetry, is to get those little Velcro thoughts stuck on people. Like the conscious of a society, so that these things are still brought up.
And for people of color, like who've had their entire mythology taken from them, reconnecting to that, it gives us a future. A lot of times, being able to define our past and reconnect with our past and bring that into the present, it gives us a future in a lot of ways. Like, into like our old gods, like Ogun, you know what I mean? All these people, all the Shiras, it's dope. So I think I think it's a very powerful medium for giving a voice to, like, the downtrodden or the suppressed, you know what I mean?
Yeah. How about you, Colleen?
I was just going to say that made me think of when I was in Budapest last year, and there's a group doing medieval historical recreation, like the medieval society. I belong to the Society for Creative Anachronism, but they approach it differently there. And I talked to a few of the people that could speak English, and they looked at it as a way to try and get back their nationality, where they've been invaded and overtaken and had Nazi occupation. And for them, to be able to connect to history by reenacting it was another way for them to connect to their own true history and that need to know where we came from. So, and I think with all of this, fairy tales, myths, whether we're making them up or we're reinventing them, that we can use this all in our own descriptive language. We can present it new. We can talk about social causes. We can give perspectives. We can give different feelings and emotions with all of these.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Do you have anything to add to that, Max?
No, just the other half of me, the cosmic core half of me, is now just saying, well, gods are a powerful medium. They're wonderful with the human experience, but then it's like, oh, they're also just a way for humanity to justify their own existence, and it's a great inspiration. But that's the cosmic core side of me coming out. So we don't have another 3 hours. So
There was a question for Jamal for do you have an Afrofuturist poet that you would recommend?
I can put. How do I post in the chat the name of this?
You should probably do private chat, and then I can paste it over. For some reason, guests can't directly, or you could go on YouTube and put it in.
I just sent it to you.
Okay, I'm going to share that. Oh yeah, why did I not think of Donald? And I apologize about my dog.
He's the guy right now. He just won a Nebula, right, or something like that.
Sherry Renee Thomas is another one.
Yeah, Sherry Renee Thomas, of course. She actually is the person who got me into speculative fiction when I was younger. Her book Dark Matter. It's the first book I've ever read. I was like the only weirdo in the hood writing these space tales and all this stuff and reading these crazy books. And she was like, yeah, there's a whole bunch of people there. That's how I got introduced to Linda Addison. All these different people's life changing for me. So
yeah, I agree.
But Donald's great too, and she
All right, I think that's about it. We have gone like so much overtime. Don't get a bunch of poets talking about poetry because we will be here till midnight. Next, we're already on week 4, which will be crafting poetic forms. Again, everybody send in your poems by Wednesday. You don't have to send them on Wednesday. It's just Wednesdays kind of so that we can read them and then respond to any questions. Oh, which reminds me, we did have a question, of course, while I have barking dogs.
Well, while you're looking that up, I'd like to remind people, please put author's journey into the subject line because I'm going to be losing people's poems if they don't do that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I actually started a new email address so that I don't lose poems because my email is a horror. But I do really quick, you guys indulge me for 1 minute because we did actually have a question from KB Nelson that I wanted to talk about. It's a big one, but we're just going to cover it lightly, I think, because we are out of time. And then we can come back to it later or maybe write something about it. But KB brings up, and we're talking about ancient Greece, so it's kind of appropriate as a segue. Cultural appropriation. So they wrote a poem using a First Nation goddess called Lady of Fire, which was awesome. I really liked it. But they said they feel uncomfortable because they are not First Nation, should they write that poem? And so really quickly, everybody give your thoughts. My thought is how do we build bridges, cultural bridges, if we can't cross over to other culture? But as long as it's done respectfully,
exactly,
and in the spirit of, I really want to know, explain it to me, and you can be not of that culture, talking about what you see in that culture as well. So what are you guys' thoughts?
I agree with you with everything that you just said. I think that it's important to have respect for the culture and have somebody that can kind of from the culture to probably take a look at it when you're done. But I think as long as you have that and you're approaching it from a human perspective, because we're all human at the end of the day before we're anything else, I think it's fine. I think it's fine.
Yeah, otherwise we're only going to be able to write about people who look like us, who are our age and live in our culture. I've written a couple First Nation stories, and I did when I worked on her poem, I did chat with her about that. And again, same thing, as long as you're doing it respectfully with research, you sometimes can't always get somebody of the culture to respond, as I have found out. So then it's just doing what you can to understand before you write, to get the perspective correct. And you're not writing for all of a culture. You're writing a particular character.
Yeah. I agree. As long as you're as long as you're being truthful and respectful to the culture, and if you can find a beta or a sensitivity reader, then yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to just add to that a little bit. You don't always have to write exactly, even if it is your culture, but you feel like you don't understand it. So I have a mystical realism book that I'm finishing now, that I'm actually editing now. It's finished. Yay, I just have to edit it. But it's on World War II on Okinawa and the things that happened. My family left right before they happened because yay, mediums. We know what's going on and we gone. But so I didn't feel like that's my story to talk about necessarily. So I wrote it on a fictional Okinawa with a fictional World War II. And this is my understanding of what happened that I've been told from stories, even though it's not really my story or my family's story to tell. So you can do your impressions of it. I think the key is with respect, not trying to, with respect and an open mind.
Don't show up like Rachel Dolezal. You know what I mean? That's it. As long as you don't do that, you good. You good,
Yeah.
Don't do that, you good.
All right. And KB Nelson says, thank you for diving in this topic. I hope that kind of covered it a little bit. And I apologize. I meant to bring that up in the middle so we could really discuss it, but I'm glad I didn't forget it. And we can talk about that again more next week, I think, because that's always a good topic to bring up. But now we're done. We have already tortured everybody for 7 minutes with talk of poetry, which I find awesome. We're going to be talking about crafting poetic forms next time, the role of form in poetry. We're going to have some exercises on different forms of poetry, like Villanelle's haiku and other things that we did talk about in the first lesson. And then again, on Wednesdays, by Wednesday is when you should put in your poetry to us. And I don't know, does anybody else have anything to say?
I would rather they do it on Tuesdays because there's a lot that comes in at random times. And sometimes a night to just go over everything is not enough. I think we need at least.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, and I think that was a misunderstanding. People thought they had to wait until Tuesday. Send it in whenever you are ready to send it in. Tuesday is kind of like can we have it by then?
Yeah.
So, and awesome poetry been coming in. So everybody's doing a really amazing job. So, all right. I guess with that, thank you all for being here. And we will see you next week talking about more poetry. Bye, guys.